Recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the budget point, I made this point before the committee before. The House just passed a budget that adds nearly $3 trillion to an already out-of-control debt. So if we do really want to spend money on defense or anywhere else, we ought to be willing to pay for it. And I this, certainly go back through generations of, bipartisan problems with this. You can't have a debt that size and keep coming back talking about how much money you're going to spend, whether it's defense or whatever your priorities are. And Mr. Secretary, you said the 99% down on border crossings and the border is secure. At the same time, we're going to take $1 billion out of the MILCON budget, out of building barracks, to send it for the border, and there's another 4,000 troops that we're planning on sending down to the border. Given that the border is secure, might you rethink that spending?
Adding nearly $3 trillion in debt also raises questions about the long-term trajectory of the economy. Deficit spending can be beneficial during times of crisis, such as wars or recessions, when immediate investments are needed to stabilize the country. But when deficits become the norm, not the exception, it signals a lack of strategic vision. It suggests that policymakers are more interested in short-term gains than long-term outcomes. Moreover, persistent borrowing can crowd out private investment, slow economic growth, and increase inflationary pressures, especially when the economy is already running near capacity. These are not abstract threats. They have real-world consequences, including higher prices for consumers, reduced business confidence, and lower quality of life for average Americans. The budget debate also revealed deeper philosophical differences about the role of government. Some policymakers argue that the federal government should do more, provide health care, invest in renewable energy, rebuild infrastructure, or fund universal pre-K. Others believe the government has already grown too large and that further expansion only exacerbates the debt problem. What both sides often fail to acknowledge is that these arguments become meaningless if they are not tied to a sustainable fiscal plan. Expanding programs without funding them is irresponsible. Likewise, calling for cuts without offering viable alternatives is equally reckless. The $3 trillion increase in debt reflects a failure to find common ground on this fundamental issue. The hearing was also a reminder that fiscal responsibility is not just about numbers, it's about values. Every budget is a reflection of priorities. When we choose to spend trillions on certain programs without funding them, we are making a choice about what matters most to us as a nation. If those choices lead to long-term harm, whether economic, social, or strategic, then we must ask whether our values are aligned with our actions. It's not enough to say we care about national security, economic growth, or social justice. We must demonstrate that commitment through sound financial management. Ultimately, the addition of $3 trillion in new debt should be a wake-up call. It should prompt a serious national conversation about where we're headed and how we plan to get there. Are we willing to make tough choices today to secure a better tomorrow, or will we continue to defer responsibility, hoping future leaders will clean up the mess? History shows that nations which fail to manage their finances eventually face painful corrections, whether through inflation, austerity, or economic collapse. The United States still has time to avoid that fate, but only if it begins to take fiscal discipline seriously. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to reverse course, ChatGPT said. During the hearing, one of the most striking contradictions came from the discussion surrounding border security. The Secretary of Defense confidently claimed that the southern U.S. border is secure. However, that assertion was immediately undermined by the government's decision to reallocate $1 billion from the military construction budget, money originally designated to build essential infrastructure like barracks for troops, and redirect it to border operations. On top of that, plans were announced to deploy 4,000 additional troops to the border. These actions directly contradicted the claim of a secure border and raised serious concerns among lawmakers and the public alike. If the border is truly secure, why are such substantial resources and personnel being funneled into it? The explanation provided by the Secretary was that while the border is technically secure, maintaining that security remains manpower intensive. This distinction, however, appeared more like political spin than a clear policy position. Lawmakers immediately pressed back, pointing out the inconsistency in language. Secure means safe, not in need of major reinforcements. The use of vague terminology created confusion and diminished trust in the administration's handling of both national security and defense priorities. Instead of instilling confidence, the exchange left many wondering whether the border is as secure as claimed, or if the situation is being misrepresented to justify budget shifts. The decision to pull funds from the military construction budget also raised broader questions about defense readiness. Troops require adequate housing, training facilities, and logistical support. Stripping funding from these essential needs to reinforce border operations could impact morale and operational effectiveness. It sends a conflicting message to service members, suggesting that their well-being and infrastructure come second to political priorities. This is particularly troubling given the already high demands placed on the military and the increasing complexity of global threats. Furthermore, lawmakers pointed out that the promise to restore the reallocated funds in the following fiscal year remains uncertain. Budget processes are subject to change, political shifts, and unforeseen economic conditions. As a result, there's no guarantee that the military construction budget will be fully replenished, leaving the Department of Defense potentially shortchanged. This uncertainty erodes trust between Congress, the Pentagon, and the public, and it weakens the government's ability to plan strategically. Ultimately, the contradiction between words and actions regarding the border reflects a deeper problem in public policy: the use of selective narratives to justify controversial decisions. Claiming success while simultaneously diverting resources reveals a lack of transparency and undermines confidence in government leadership. If the border is not secure enough to reduce military involvement, that truth should be acknowledged and addressed with honesty and consistency. If it is secure, then such drastic reallocations of defense funds must be carefully justified. Without clarity, the government risks further politicizing national security issues at the expense of public trust and military readiness.
We set up a lot of requirements. Defense contractors are part of the problem. I'm curious, how would you get after reforming the culture at the Pentagon so that you can move faster, number one, and number two, how would you get after the defense contractors that push the requirements process? And specifically, what would you do about the requirements process to try to speed things up?
Well, first of all, I think gold plating is a real problem, sir. I mean, across the department.
Interesting to use the word gold in this particular context, but yes, I agree with you, actually.
We maybe could use a little bit more silver plating on occasion. A recognition that the 99% solution is oftentimes the enemy of the 85% solution that delivers 2 years sooner. And that's contractors and other companies wanting to do right, but trying to do too much and overpromise, and then they're under-delivering, and the warfighter...
Not always wanting to do right. In some cases, just
not
wanting,
always,
just
not
wanting
always.
to make money,
So,
but yes.
The change is also in acquisitions about people.
The discussion during the hearing took a surprising and provocative turn when a lawmaker directly questioned the Secretary of Defense about whether the U.S. Department of Defense was preparing military plans to take control of Greenland and Panama by force if necessary. At first, the question seemed hypothetical or even absurd. However, the response it provoked was anything but dismissive. Instead of outright denying the existence of such plans, the Secretary stated that it is the Pentagon's responsibility to have plans for every possible contingency. That includes scenarios most people would find highly unlikely or politically explosive. While he clarified that having a plan does not equate to having the intention to act on it, the very idea that such military operations are being considered, even hypothetically, raised eyebrows in the room and across the political spectrum. This moment in the hearing revealed a deeply unsettling aspect of how the Department of Defense operates. The U.S. military, by design, prepares for a wide array of global possibilities, including actions against foreign nations in response to perceived threats or strategic opportunities. In this context, the Secretary mentioned concerns about China's growing influence in both Panama and the Arctic, where Greenland plays a critical role due to its location and resources. The implication was that, should China establish a threatening presence in those regions, the U.S. must be ready to respond militarily if necessary. The statement touched a nerve. It suggested a level of strategic aggression that many Americans might not be comfortable with, especially when it involves sovereign nations with no direct hostilities toward the United States. While planning for contingencies is standard military procedure, discussing potential invasions in a public forum without clear diplomatic framing adds fuel to fears about American imperial overreach. It also raises significant concerns about how defense policy is being shaped behind closed doors, and whether elected officials and the public have sufficient oversight into those plans. This line of questioning also exposed a fundamental tension between defense preparedness and democratic accountability. On one hand, the Pentagon must be prepared for any crisis, even those that seem remote. On the other hand, those preparations can come dangerously close to normalizing the idea of military intervention in peaceful regions. When the Secretary of Defense refuses to rule out armed plans for places like Greenland and Panama, it opens a Pandora's box of strategic ambiguity that could be misinterpreted by allies and adversaries alike. Moreover, this revelation could have diplomatic repercussions. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a U.S. ally, and Panama is a sovereign nation with which the U.S. shares complex but peaceful relations. The suggestion that the United States is developing plans to take military action in these areas could damage alliances, strain diplomatic ties, and signal an aggressive posture that contradicts America's stated commitment to international cooperation and rule of law. In the end, while contingency planning is a logical aspect of military readiness, the way it was presented and discussed during the hearing revealed a troubling lack of transparency. It underscored the need for clearer communication, more defined limits on military planning narratives, and a stronger emphasis on diplomacy over force, especially in regions that have not demonstrated hostility toward the United States. In the face of mounting criticism over the inefficiencies and bureaucracy within the Department of Defense, the Secretary of Defense emphasized a new direction, one focused on innovation, reform, and disruption from within. He explained that the Pentagon is actively working to bring in fresh perspectives from the private sector, particularly individuals with proven track records as innovators and disruptors. These reformers, he asserted, are being placed in key leadership roles such as deputy and undersecretaries, with the explicit goal of shaking up traditional practices and streamlining outdated systems that have long plagued defense operations. One of the most promising approaches mentioned was the integration of advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and virtual design tools into the military's development and planning processes. Historically, building physical prototypes of new military equipment has been a time-consuming and expensive endeavor, often taking years to move from design to testing. But with virtual modeling and simulation, much of that work can now be done digitally. This shift allows engineers and planners to identify flaws, refine systems, and make adjustments before any physical resources are committed. It saves both time and money while enhancing the quality and reliability of the final product. The Secretary also highlighted the importance of creating open architectural systems in defense technology. Instead of locking the military into proprietary systems built by a single contractor, which can lead to cost overruns, delays, and inflexibility, the department is encouraging designs that are modular and interoperable. This means components can be upgraded or replaced more easily without having to overhaul entire systems. It also opens the door for a wider range of suppliers and ideas, fostering competition and reducing dependency on a small number of defense contractors. Beyond technology, the Secretary underscored that the most important change is cultural. The Pentagon must break free from a mindset where following rigid procedures and preserving the status quo is more important than achieving results. To that end, he said, leadership is intentionally bringing in people who think outside the box, people who are not afraid to challenge assumptions or question established norms. These individuals, many with backgrounds in entrepreneurship or Silicon Valley, understand that innovation often requires risks, taking and flexibility, not just adherence to tradition. This effort to disrupt internal systems and processes is not just about efficiency, it's about ensuring the military remains agile and prepared in an increasingly complex global environment. With threats evolving faster than ever before, the Pentagon cannot afford to be bogged down by red tape or outdated thinking. Reforming acquisition timelines, embracing emerging technologies, and changing leadership culture are essential to maintaining the U.S. military's edge. Ultimately, the Secretary's message was one of cautious optimism. While reform is never easy, especially in an institution as large and entrenched as the Department of Defense, he believes the will and talent now exist to make meaningful progress. The goal is not to tear everything down, but to reimagine how the Pentagon operates in the 21st century. In doing so, the department hopes to deliver better results for service members, taxpayers, and the nation as a whole.